Hi all, welcome to this that marks the first video in the lithosphere topic. And in this video we're going to be just having a quick chat about what the main things that we're going to cover in the following topic are, and we're going to talk about some terminology and some of the processes that are particularly important in the topic. So to start us off about lithosphere, now this is one a very straightforward slide because lithosphere at its core is a reasonably straightforward unit in terms of what it focuses on. In this, we are looking at feature formations, and we're going to be looking at four sets of feature formations, which you can subdivide into kind of two main groups. So we're going to be looking at features that are found in either glacial or coastal landscapes, and then in each of those, we're going to be looking at features that are formed largely by erosional processes and features that are formed largely by depositional processes. Now, processes is a massive part of this topic. Now, the good news is, for the most part, the vast majority of the terminology that we're going to be talking about is stuff that we've already covered. Now, it's stuff that we looked at, so you've either looked at as part of the National 5 course, or if you've not, it's stuff that we can brush up on very quickly during actual lessons. But for the most part, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time in today's video talking about the kind of what is corrosion, for example, because at this stage, I mean, this is stuff that higher you should know, or we can actually say we can brush up on during lessons if we need to. So what I want to focus on today are some of the new bits of terminology that we're actually going to look at, and some of the different terms that are a little bit more advanced than what we've used previously. So to start us off, kind of some general terms that aren't particularly associated with um, any particular type of landscape, but if we're looking at kind of either the land being raised up or the land being worn down. Now, mountain building, and to use that as a phrase is maybe a little bit erroneous. We should really just be talking about processes that build up land, not necessarily into mountains. But with mountain building, we're talking about any new material that's added to the Earth's surface. Now, there are kind of three main ways that this can happen. We could be talking about volcanism, so we could be talking literally about layers of ash and lava being added onto the Earth's surface and building up in that way. We could be talking about tectonic uplift in general. You know, if we think about the situation in the Himalayas right now, where you've got the Indian subcontinent, which is, you know, very slowly bulldozing its way into the Eurasian continent from the south, building up the Himalayas as it goes. Another one that we could introduce at this stage is something called isostatic rebound. Now, isostatic rebound is when we get a bounce back in the Earth's crust because we release a load that was on the crust. Now, in the context that we're looking at in the UK, we're talking about the removal of glacial load. So if we go back, 10, 11,000 years was the end of the last glacial period that the UK was subject to, and a huge amount of glacial ice, kilometre plus thickness of ice was removed from the kind of northern part of the UK. Now, that's had an impact in that it's meant you've had, the northern half of the UK being pushed down by all this ice, and the southern half of the UK is then actually very slightly elevated, and you remove this weight and it bounces up. So we're actually seeing this now, where generally we are seeing the southern parts of the UK drop down slightly, as Scotland and northern England actually increases very slightly in altitude, thanks to isostatic rebound. Now, a new term here that kind of wraps up a lot of different terms that we've already used, but it gives us a bit of a catch-all phrase, is denudation. Now, when we're talking about denudation, we're talking about a process that removes material from the Earth's surface, otherwise known as erosion. Now, we use denudation because it can bracket in all the forms of erosion, regardless of their context, and it can also bracket in things like weathering. And I've got weathering in this slide as well, as we're just talking about removal of material from the Earth's surface by the weather. Now, when we look at weathering in particular, we can split that down into three subcategories as well. We've got physical, chemical, and biotic. Now, physical weathering is literally, movements in the Earth's surface that break rocks into smaller pieces. But the key point here is they're not using they're not using chemical processes. An example of this is frost shattering or freeze thaw, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Another one, chemical weathering. A chemical reaction, any chemical reaction that reduces rocks in size chemically. The big example we use for this would be limestone dissolution or limestone solution. So where we've got rainwater, that due to the slightly acidic nature of the carbonic acid that makes up rainwater, and limestone's calcium carbonate nature, meaning it dissolves readily in anything acidic, we get chemical weathering here. Last one, biotic weathering, rocks being broken down by the action of living things. Now this could be through things like root action, so tree roots that will very gradually burrow straight through rock. It could be through animals burrowing into bits of rock as well, and it could be us. We are an agent of biotic weathering. Quarrying, all this kind of stuff gets classified as biotic weathering. Now, one of the kind of last things that I'm going to look at today, frost shattering and freeze thaw. Now, these are two terms that are absolutely interchangeable. They mean literally the same thing. I tend to say frost shattering more often than not, but it really is down to your own preference. Now, what is it? I've got a rock, it's got a tiny crack in it. I fill the tiny crack with water. Overnight, the temperature drops and the water freezes. As it freezes, it expands. I get to daytime, the water thaws, so the level of water in the rock drops. Refills throughout the day with rain, etc. I come to nighttime again, it freezes, it expands again. And this process is going to keep repeating and repeating and repeating until eventually, crack, I'm going to have two rocks. That keeps going until I reduce rocks down in size continually by this process. And this can also be used to shear large blocks of material off cliffs as well. Now, the literally last thing that I want to talk about today, purely because it is a brand new erosional process, is plucking. Now, plucking is really straightforward, actually. Even though it's new, it is really kind of obvious in how it works. Plucking is the removal of rocks from a cliff, from a mountain, by tearing them off, by plucking them by a glacier. So if I've got a glacier, it's going to freeze prominent bits of rock into the side of it. That glacier is going to move, it's going to be dragged downhill by gravity, and as it moves, it rips the rock away with it. That's plucking. Now, that in and itself obviously takes material away from the Earth's surface, but it then also makes that glacier a more powerful erosional tool, because it gives that glacier, you can think of it as more teeth to actually then corrode and to erode further. Now, that's going to wrap up today's video, guys. In the next video, we're going to talk about our glacial erosional landforms. And until then, I'll see you guys later.